I get it. It's annoying. A lot of times when you're having a conversation with somebody and they cut you off or they interrupt you with something that they say themselves, it's not because they don't understand you. It's not because they're not listening. It's just because they don't know how to keep their ideas in their head for a long period of time. So, with that being said, I want to talk about three ways that you can get past people that are interrupting you or cutting you off mid conversation and how you can calmly respond without trying to get revenge or try to get back at them for cutting you off, right? So, the first thing is you have to let them take over the conversation. The reason why they interrupt is because they feel like they are unheard. And that may not be true. You may be listening to them the entire time, but that's totally fine because I'm going to teach you how to guide their questions to actually answer what you had as a question instead of trying to interrupt them with your own points and argue with them. I'll get to that later. But what we want to try instead is just listen. Let them have their own conversation. Even if it's kind of just talking to a brick wall, just let them get their words out so that way they can feel that they're being heard in the room. For some people, this may take a long time. For others, it may take only 10 to 20 seconds. But eventually, they'll tire themselves out from talking so much that they don't even realize what they're saying, and then they'll just stop. That's how it works all the time. I've experienced it firsthand. So if you've ever been in a conversation where somebody yaps a lot, if you notice, there's two outcomes. There's either the people that interrupt them back and they have this kind of back and forth and it feels almost like an egotistical conversation instead of one that like invites friendliness and interaction. But the other result is simply that person will be done talking and then the other person will go. And it's simple because that person will be so tired of listening to themselves that they just quit. Or they get confused because they forget what they were saying or their idea isn't that high quality and people see that. So eventually they'll learn that, oh, maybe I should stop talking. And then it kind of naturally gets taught into them instead of somebody else trying to interrupt them and tell them, hey, your point here is kind of stupid, because nobody likes to hear that. Nobody likes to directly hear a complaint or criticism unless they're willing to accept it. And very few people are. So you have to try to get to them in a way that doesn't interrupt their flow of conversation while keeping their focus intact on the conversation itself and not on you rejecting them. So now here's the next part. This part I didn't learn until a couple of years ago, but I started using it and changed everything. Guide them with open-ended questions. Now you might be like, okay, well, how do I do that? And it's honestly not as hard as you think it is. Since they like to yap a lot, they'll give you a lot of detail on something. You already know that because they'll go into depth. They'll say one, two, three. They'll say their example and all this. So all you have to do as the person who's listening to this is come up with a question, an open-ended question that they can answer, and it's better for them to yap. You have to fuel the conversation by giving them the advantage. Well, how do I say this? It's not quite that, but like if you are talking to somebody, you want to let them yapping turn into your advantage. So you could do that by asking them an open-ended question. For example, if I wanted to know more about airplanes, right? And let's say I want to know about how they make the airplane parts. Maybe he starts yapping about airplanes. They blah, 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 airplane. Eventually, when you listen long enough, he'll tire himself out. There'll be a silent gap. And that silent gap, people get very uncomfortable in. So if you don't fill it quick, he'll fill it quicker, and then he'll keep going. So what you have to do is find that silent gap and tell them, okay, you have a great idea, but I have a quick question. Now, that's not saying, okay, I hate you, I don't want you to talk anymore, but it's allowing them to introduce a new idea into their own conversation, into the flow that's going on in their head. So then you can stop and ask them, okay, so where do you get your airplane parts from? It's a simple question like that. Now, that one's not super open-ended, but essentially it'll get them going down the path of talking about airplane parts and saying, oh, well, we get them from this company. If we have to repair them, we go here. And now you've got not only your question answered, but way more detail on it than you would with a normal conversation, because the normal people, they just kind of stay silent after they give their very blunt or direct answer. So even with that continuous flow, it can actually serve to your advantage if you give them the right open-ended question. See, you can't control the response, but you can control what they think. And that is where you get that advantage in a conversation, so that way you don't have to react so like angry, arrogant, You know what I mean? When somebody interrupts you. So keep that in mind. If you ask them that open-ended question, it'll allow them to just rant on, and then you'll be able to listen to it and get your answer. Either it's going to immediately show up with your question, or maybe later on, as they're talking, you actually get the answer through whatever their kind of yap session about whatever it is. But another quick tip, if you want to kind of avoid this, is talk about something that they're interested in. Because a lot of times, what they're interested in, maybe you're not so interested in, but the idea to them that you are interested, quote unquote, in learning about what they do for a living or whatever it is, that makes people believe that you are a great person and that you are somebody who's willing to listen to others despite the fact that they might not like it. And that in return will give you way more respect. So then when you do eventually have to cut them off, or you want to say something, they'll be much more willing to listen to you because they know that you are someone who also listens. Because, I mean, there's an old saying that my parents have told me for years now that kind of annoys me, but you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? So applying that simple principle, if you just listen more to what they're saying instead of speaking out of turn or trying to cut them off and try to get your own point through, you will be heard eventually. Because in any conversation, you'll eventually find it weird if the one person is talking the entire time and then you never even said anything, you just left, right? That's not like, it's just because there's a longer gap in the conversational pauses where like people can switch up who's talking or whatever. It's the same way like a podcast kind of works. You'll notice how a great podcaster, they'll ask the other person an open-ended question, and then they'll keep going on about whatever point A, point B, point C, and they'll keep going for like 5 or 10 minutes. And then after they're done talking, right? And I mean, the podcast will do a couple of yes, nods, kind of give them, eye contact stuff, basics. After those few minutes, then they can come in and interject with their own open-ended question again. And then repeating that cycle over and over again will eventually get you the answer. Now, the one caveat to this would be, well, what if I don't have time? What if I need like 5 minutes, right? And this is where it depends on the question. Is your open-ended question something like, where's the closest gas station? If it is, then you could get a quick answer. Oh, it's the quick fill down the road. Perfect. That's all you needed. That doesn't take too long. But if your open-ended question is what type of philosophy you'd like to follow in your life, well, that can't be solved in 5 minutes. That's your fault. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm saying that because, like, literally, you're asking them a question about their life, and you're expecting to get an answer in 5 minutes. If I asked you a question about your life, and about, like, whatever philosophy you follow, do you think you could answer it in 5 minutes? I guarantee you, almost all of you would say no. And that's normal, because not everybody's meant to be able to respond that quickly. And you have to take time for those types of things. That's fine. But that just means you can't be doing it in a scenario where you only have a short amount of time, because then you're going to try to interrupt them and try to cut to the point and be like, oh, sorry, I gotta go. Then it's like, dude, why would you ask the fucking question? You know what I mean? So you gotta find the right circumstances to ask the right questions. Make sure you have plenty of time. That's a very important thing, because some people don't do that. Some people will just straight up try to have a conversation like that in 10 minutes, and it's just not happening. Just physically not possible for that person unless they've really dug into that, which I highly doubt, because they usually have job or other just responsibilities, and they don't really have time to think for themselves in that sense. But there are some people that do, and maybe you talk to one of them. Maybe you get lucky. Okay, great. But not everybody gets lucky. Anyway, I digress. The other important thing, which I already mentioned, but I'll mention it in more detail here, don't interrupt them. While they're explaining that, they're trying to get out every detail they can because they want to make sure that they're heard accurately. Now, they may not have the best lexicon or the best language to use for that, because maybe their vocabulary is limited, but that part doesn't matter as much as for them to just try to... Okay, here's a metaphor for you. You know how a cat rolls out a ball of yarn? That kind of thing? That's the same way a person tries to get out their ideas if they don't know the words to describe them. They're just pulling on that string and hoping that something kind of clicks to them and that they realize, oh yeah, I'm trying to get this out. This is what I wanted to say. And it may take them 10, 15 minutes. It may take them only 5 minutes. It depends on the person. And it depends on how self-aware they are of the fact that they're ranting and they're going on a tangent about whatever the question is. So don't interrupt that person, because that thought process is training them or allowing them to become quicker at describing what they're feeling, to use different words in different scenarios. Those types of conversations are important for people to learn how to use their own speech. So if somebody is interrupting, you can try to make them stop so that way that person can continue going. Because it's more important for, even if you're in a group setting, it's more important for everybody to listen to that person than for them to start talking, cutting each other off. Because then the conversation degrades and it doesn't feel as valuable as it would have if you just let that person go. With that being said, that is a very simple guide on how to react calmly to people when they interrupt you. If you do those 3 things, I guarantee you'll be much calmer. You won't have as much anxiety or stress when talking to that person, let alone anger or frustration. And afterwards, you'll be able to have great conversations with this person because you know how to manage people. Dealing with people is almost, I would say, is the best skill you can learn in life, because you're going to be in so many different scenarios with so many different people that at the end of the day, if you don't know how to manage the people that are around you, they won't be able to manage you. You won't be able to get your own thoughts out. You won't be able to speak clearly. You won't be able to speak in a way that empowers the people that you're talking to. And without that kind of, I guess, motivation, people will ignore you because they don't believe that what you're saying is insightful or valuable or clever or whatever. So don't be afraid to let somebody else take the spotlight for a few minutes. Okay, somebody just drifted out of the Dollar General parking lot, which is in my backyard. Anyway, so with that being said, thank you for watching, and I hope that this video helps you become a little bit more calm and a little bit more more capable of being able to have those tough conversations with people, or even the simple ones, without having to interrupt them or feel like you're not being heard.